Come, settle yourself quietly by the fire, fellow seeker of truth. But keep your voice low tonight. Some knowledge is dangerous to speak aloud, and the shadows have ears for those who traffic in secrets that powerful forces would prefer remain hidden. Tonight's tale demands to be told by someone who understands that the most terrifying monsters are not always those with claws and fangs, but those with quills and parchment, whose weapons are plans laid in shadow over generations. This voice you hear belongs to one who has sat in candlelit chambers, surrounded by forbidden texts, who has pieced together fragments of truth to reveal horrors that eclipse any mere physical threat. So lean close to the dying light, friend, and prepare yourself for Dark Secrets of the Cult Unmasked, a story of reality anchors and draconic prophecies, of knowledge that carries its own curse, and of two agents who discovered that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with swords, but with wisdom turned against those who would remake the world in their own twisted image. The Candlekeep library stood as it always had, eternal, imposing, and filled with the accumulated wisdom of ages. Its towers reached towards the heavens, like fingers grasping for divine knowledge, while its thick walls contained secrets that could reshape the world if ever they were fully understood. For Brother Leosin Erlanthar, it had become both sanctuary and prison, a place where he could research the cult of the dragon's true nature, while remaining safely distant from their immediate reach. But safety, as the monk had learned through bitter experience, was always temporary when dealing with the forces that had been gathering power for centuries. The chamber where Leosin worked was deep within Candlekeep's restricted sections, accessible only to those scholars whose dedication to knowledge had been proven beyond doubt. Ancient tomes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather bindings cracked with age, and their pages filled with secrets that most people were better off not knowing. The air itself seemed heavy with accumulated wisdom, as if the very atoms had been saturated with centuries of scholarly contemplation. On the massive oak table before him, Leosin had spread out the fruits of months of painstaking research. Maps showing the cult's known activities, genealogical charts tracing the bloodlines of their leaders, transcripts of intercepted communications, and most disturbing of all, fragments of their actual ritual texts. Each document was a piece of a vast puzzle, and the picture that was emerging was far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The monk's trained eyes moved across a particular manuscript with the focused intensity of someone whose life depended on understanding every nuance of meaning. The text was written in multiple languages: Hydroconic for the ritual components, Thayan for the magical formulae, and Common for the practical instructions that would guide the cult's foot soldiers. But it was the marginalia that truly chilled his blood. Casual notes written by cult leaders that revealed the true scope of their ambitions. The Queen's return requires more than mere summoning, read one annotation in elegant script. The barriers between planes must be permanently weakened, allowing her influence to seep into the very foundations of reality. Only then will the New Age truly begin. Leosin set down his reading glass and rubbed his tired eyes, trying to process the implications of what he was learning. The most commonly held belief was that the cult of the dragon sought to summon Tiamat back to the material plane, where she could be defeated by sufficient force, or perhaps bargained with by clever negotiators. But the truth was far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. They weren't trying to bring Tiamat back temporarily. They were trying to fundamentally alter the structure of reality itself, creating a world where the Dragon Queen's power would be absolute and unchallengeable. A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted his contemplation. "Come," he called, expecting one of Candlekeep's acolytes with his evening meal, or perhaps another scholar seeking access to his research materials. Instead, the figure who entered was someone he had not expected to see again. Jamna Gleamsilver, the gnome merchant whose true identity as a Harper agent had been revealed during the cult's caravan operations. Her normally cheerful demeanor was subdued, and there was a wariness in her eyes that spoke of recent dangers, narrowly avoided. "Brother Leosin," she said, her voice carrying a note of relief. "I had hoped I'd find you here. I bring news from the field, and I'm afraid none of it is good." "Jamna," Leosin replied, gesturing for her to take a seat at the research table. "I had wondered what become of you after the caravan incident. The reports I received were incomplete." The gnome settled into a chair that had been designed for human proportions, her feet dangling well above the floor. Despite her small stature, there was nothing diminutive about the intensity of her expression as she surveyed the documents spread across the table. "The cult's operations are far more extensive than we realized," she began without preamble. "What we saw with the caravans was just one small piece of a network that spans the entire continent. They have cells in every major city, safe houses along every major trade route, and resources that would make ancient dragons weep with envy." "I've been researching similar conclusions through my research here," Leosin admitted. "But tell me what you've seen with your own eyes." Jamna's account of her infiltration of the cult's inner circles was both fascinating and terrifying. She had managed to maintain her cover as a converted agent for several months, long enough to witness high-level planning sessions and even attend some of the cult's most sacred rituals. What she had learned during that time painted a picture of an organization whose sophistication and reach had been dramatically underestimated. "They have a complete understanding of magical theory that goes back to the earliest days of civilization," she explained, pulling out a small journal filled with her own coded notes. "Their leaders aren't just fanatics. They're scholars, researchers, magical theorists who have spent lifetimes studying the fundamental nature of reality itself." She opened her journal to a particular page covered with diagrams that seemed to hurt the eyes to look at directly. "These are copies of some of their ritual circles," she said. "Not the simple summoning patterns that most people think they are, but complex multidimensional matrices that interact with the basic forces that hold the planes together." Leosin studied the diagrams with the focused attention of someone who had spent years studying magical theory. What he saw made his blood run cold. "These aren't summoning circles," he said slowly. "These are reality anchors. They're designed to create permanent connections between the material plane and the Nine Hells." "Exactly. And they're not planning to create just one. According to the documents I was able to copy, they intend to establish 13 such anchors across the continent, each one positioned at a point where the magical energies of the world naturally converge. 13 permanent portals to the Nine Hells, each one allowing Tiamat's influence to flow into the material plane like a poison seeping into a well. Over time, the very nature of reality in those areas would change, becoming more like the hellish realm that the Dragon Queen called home." "How close are they to completing this network?" Leosin asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Closer than anyone realizes. They already have 7 of the 13 sites prepared, with the ritual anchors in place and the initial ceremonies completed. The magical infrastructure is there. They just need the final components to activate the full network. The dragon masks, and the accumulated treasure. But there's more." Jamna's expression grew even more grave. "The masks aren't just keys to the ritual. They're fragments of Tiamat's own essence. Pieces of her consciousness that were separated from her when she was banished to the Nine Hells. When the 5 masks were brought together at the center of the anchor network, they won't just open a doorway for her return. They'll provide her with the means to exist simultaneously across multiple planes of reality. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of revelation. Leosin had spent months piecing together fragments of the cult's plans, but hearing it laid out so clearly was like having a puzzle suddenly snap into focus, revealing a picture more horrifying than he dared imagine. "There's something else," Jamna continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something I learned during the highest level ceremonies I was allowed to witness. The cult leaders speak of this as the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, something they call the Tyranny of Dragons. But it's not about dragon dominance over the other races. It's about the fundamental transformation of the world itself." She pulled out another set of notes, these written in a cipher so complex that even reading them seemed to require considerable effort. According to their beliefs, the current world is an aberration, a mistake that occurred when the cosmic forces were thrown out of balance during some primordial catastrophe. They believe that Tiamat's return will restore the natural order where dragons rule, not just as the dominant species, but as the only species worthy of true consciousness. "Genocide," Leosin said quietly. "Not conquest, but the systematic elimination of every form of life that doesn't serve their vision. Worse than that, according to their text, those who aren't killed outright will be transformed, changed on a fundamental level to become more suitable servants. Humans turned into kobold-like creatures, elves and dwarves reduced to mindless labor beasts, halflings bred as livestock. They have detailed plans for the improvement of every race through draconic influence." The monk stood and walked to the chamber's single window, staring out at the peaceful landscape that surrounded Candlekeep. It was hard to believe that such beauty could be threatened by the kind of cosmic evil that Jamna was describing. But he had seen enough evidence to know that her account was accurate. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Less than we'd hoped. The cult is accelerating their timeline. Something has them spooked. Maybe the losses they've taken from adventuring groups, maybe political pressure from the major kingdoms. They're pushing to complete the anchor network within the next few months, even if it means taking risks they would normally avoid." "On the 5 masks?" "Still scattered, but they're making progress in gathering them. The Black Mask is definitely under their control, worn by someone high in their hierarchy. The White Mask is complicated. There are conflicting reports about its current location. The others are actively being hunted by their most skilled agents." Leosin returned to the table and began gathering up the most sensitive documents, preparing to secure them in the warded storage containers that Candlekeep used for its most dangerous materials. "This information needs to reach the Lord's Alliance, the Harpers, every organization that might be able to coordinate a response. If even half of what you've told me is true, we're facing a threat that makes traditional warfare look like a children's game." "There's one more thing," Jamna said, hesitating as if unsure whether she should reveal this final secret. "During my infiltration, I learned about a schism within the cult itself. Not all of their leaders are completely unified in their vision of what the world should become after Tiamat's return." This was unexpected news, and potentially very important. Any organization with goals as ambitious as the cult's would naturally develop internal conflicts, but the nature of those conflicts might provide opportunities for those seeking to stop them. "Tell me more." "There are 2 main factions, though they're careful not to let their disagreements become public. The first, led by someone called Severin, believes in the traditional approach. Summon Tiamat, establish draconic dominance, transform the world according to their interpretation of ancient prophecies. But there's a second faction, smaller but potentially more dangerous, that believes Severin isn't thinking big enough." "How could they possibly think bigger than remaking reality?" They want to do more than just bring Tiamat back to this plane. They want to merge the material plane with portions of the Nine Hells, where the laws of both realms apply simultaneously. Imagine a world where fire and brimstone rain from the sky as normal weather, where the very air is toxic to most forms of life, where magic itself is warped to serve only evil purposes. The description painted a picture of environmental catastrophe on a scale that dwarfed any natural disaster. It would be the end of the world as anyone currently understood it, replaced by something so alien and hostile that calling it life would be a mockery of the term. Who leads the second faction? That's where it gets interesting. The leader is someone who was once considered for the highest positions in the cult's hierarchy, but was passed over for being too radical. Someone with intimate knowledge of their operations, access to the resources, and a personal grudge against the current leadership. A name, Jamna. Rezmir. A half-black dragon who believes that Severin's plans are too conservative, too limited in scope. She's been quietly building her own network within the cult, positioning herself to seize control when the time comes to implement the final stages of their plan. Leosin had heard references to Rezmir in other documents, but always in the context of regional operations rather than high-level strategy. If she was actually positioning herself as a rival to the cult's supreme leadership, it represented both an opportunity and an additional complication. Are these factions actively working against each other? Not openly, but there are signs of tension. Resources being diverted, operations being conducted without central coordination, agents receiving conflicting orders. It's still a subtle conflict, but it's creating cracks in what was once a monolithic organization. Cracks that might be exploited. Exactly. If we could find ways to widen those cracks, to play the factions against each other, we might be able to disrupt their operations enough to prevent them from completing their timeline. The two agents spent the next several hours developing plans for disseminating Jamna's intelligence to the various organizations that were working to counter the cult's threat. The Harper networks would carry word to their cells in every major city, while the Lord's Alliance would use diplomatic channels to coordinate military responses. The Emerald Enclave would focus on protecting the natural sites that might be targeted for anchor points, while the Order of the Gauntlet would prepare for the direct confrontations that seemed inevitable. But even as they planned, both agents knew that they were racing against time in a contest where the stakes couldn't be higher. The cult had been preparing for their ultimate ritual for generations, gathering resources and positioning assets with the patient dedication that only immortal, or nearly immortal beings could maintain. Their opponents had months, perhaps weeks, to organize a response to plans that had been centuries in the making. There's one more thing we need to consider, Leosin said as their planning session neared its end. If we're successful in disrupting the cult's plans, if we manage to prevent Tiamat's return through their ritual network, what happens to all the magical energy they've been accumulating? 'Twas a sobering question. The cult had spent decades gathering not just material wealth, but magical power. Artifacts, spell components, even bound elemental forces that were intended to fuel their great working. If that energy was suddenly released without the controlled focus of their ritual, the results could be catastrophic in their own right. Magical storms, dimensional instabilities, reality tears that open randomly across the continent, Jamna mused. In some ways, a failure of their ritual could almost be as dangerous as its success. Which means we can't just disrupt their plans. We need to find a way to safely discharge all that accumulated power. We need our own ritual. Our own network of prepared sites and trained practitioners. The kind of project that would normally take decades to organize and implement. And we have months. The magnitude of the task ahead of them was daunting. But both agents had dedicated their lives to protecting the innocent from threats that seemed impossibly large. They had faced dragons and demons, mad wizards and corrupt nobles, ancient evils that most people preferred to pretend didn't exist. This was simply the latest and greatest of such challenges. As Jamna prepared to leave Candlekeep and return to the dangerous world of coordinating resistance activities, she paused at the chamber door. "Brother Leosin," she said, "do you really believe we can stop them? All of them? Everything they've planned? Everything they've prepared for?" The monk considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Outside the window, the sun was setting over a world that remained beautiful and free. A world where children could play without fear, and scholars could pursue knowledge for its own sake. That world was threatened by forces that sought to transform it into something unrecognizable. But it was also defended by the people who understood the value of what they were fighting to preserve. "I believe," he said finally, "that as long as there are people willing to stand up to evil, no matter how powerful it appears, there is always hope. The cult may have spent centuries preparing for this moment, but they have also spent centuries believing that their victory was inevitable. That kind of certainty can become a weakness, if we're clever enough to exploit it." Jamna nodded, her expression showing the kind of grim determination that had carried her through every dangerous mission she had ever undertaken. "Then we'd better be very clever indeed." As the gnome slipped away into the gathering darkness, beginning another perilous journey into the heart of enemy territory, Leosin returned to his research with renewed purpose. The dark secrets of the cult had been revealed, their ultimate plans laid bare for those with the courage to see them clearly. Now came the hard work of turning knowledge into action, of transforming understanding into victory. The lamp burned late in the Candlekeep chamber that night, its steady light illuminating pages of ancient wisdom as one monk worked to find the keys that might save the world. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair. I've countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please, light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently and ring the notification bell. That way you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it, wouldn't you agree? Now, if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them that adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery. Each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventures be worthy of legend, and may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.